Would you please welcome to the stage a woman with many hats, the Chancellor of Western Sydney University and also the Chair of Western Parkland City Authority, Jennifer Westacott, Dr Liz Develin, the CEO of the Sydney Olympic Park Authority, Gail Connolly, the CEO of the great city of Parramatta, and Belinda Comninos, the MD of Astrolabe. Got them all. Perfect reverse order, I can go from there. Jennifer, basically I'm speaking about a WAPCA sort of on steroids, the concept of a new thing. Let me first go, rather than go to WAPCA, go to the hat you've worn, your former role at BCA, engaging on global business, looking at. Is it wrong to say that in other parts of the world, similar agencies, similar public sector endeavours would be less constrained by process? Do you think currently it's unfair to ask the agency to compete with those Queensland and Victoria, let alone Singapore, Shanghai, the rest?
Yeah, look, there's no doubt when you look around the world, there's a lot more proactivity from governments to attract industry. And that's in the form of, firstly, you've got to get the fundamentals right in Australia. I don't want to re-prosecute old arguments from the Business Council, but if you've got one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world, you've got to do a lot of heavy lifting to get people past that initial hurdle. But, what I see governments doing in Singapore, in London, in Korea, in Germany, which they've been doing since the war, is basically at a precinct level, driving businesses in, concierging them in, offering in some cases special economic zones with different tax rates, co-investing with them, which we saw the Queensland government do with Sanofi around vaccine production. We just need more proactivity. We need more purpose in government to get industry into Western Sydney. It's not a case of they'll come, because there's many other places they can go. So when I talk to the big companies, they say, well, we could go to India, massively growing population. We could go to Indonesia, forecast to be the 10th biggest economy in the world. We need a business case to come to Australia and a business case to come to Western Sydney. So I agree with you. I think we need better tools to compete with Victoria and Queensland, but we certainly are competing with Singapore, with Korea, with other parts of the world. And we're going to have to do a lot of heavy lifting. The United States has got a piece of legislation called the Inflation Reduction Act, which, when you add it all together, is between a 40 and 60% tax deduction.
It's effectively the New Deal, right?
I call it the New Deal, the new Clean Green Deal. It's staggering to see it on the ground when I was there recently. So we're going to have to pull all of the levers we can to make it easier for businesses to come here. And that's what I want our authority to be able to do, to act more like the authority in Singapore that's able to pull businesses in, drag them in, give them incentives, marry them with smaller business so you drive an ecosystem, and then make sure they stay. And make sure that the quid pro quo for them, and don't forget, in all these countries, they don't just invite people in. There is a big but you have to, and that's about creating jobs. Because everything we've talked about today, there's no point having an airport, there's no point doing the housing if we don't create the economic activity, and that's not going to be from business as usual jobs. We want people in Western Sydney to have the high-tech jobs, the agribusiness jobs, the manufacturing jobs, the jobs that take us into the big global supply chains, not just the jobs that are associated with population growth.
Let me quickly take the temperature of those organisations, mostly international, who signed MOUs seems many years ago with the then government. We get a sense, are they hanging in there? Is their frustration overwhelming? They're largely Japanese and others. What do we do to keep them on the hook? The great confidence they've put in us, I don't think we've returned the confidence yet in a process to get them underway.
Yeah, I think I'm a bit more optimistic because I'm dealing with them. I think you've got to kind of set seeds, right? You've got to actually, we've got to deliver a city. So we've got to deliver a master plan. We've got to deliver the infrastructure, the public works. They can now see that's happening. A building is coming out of the ground. The metro station is coming out of the ground. They can see the CSIRO is going into Bradfield. They can see the amount of economic activity that's generated around the airport in the agribusiness precinct in the Northern Gateway. $7 billion of DAs, over 50,000 jobs. They can see that momentum, Chris. What they need now is the signals to come in. So obviously when we release the master plan, that will be a massive signal to investment because they'll be able to see the land use. Then we'll be releasing the super lots. Then they'll see that we're actually now going to actually release the land. We're going to bring forward the housing targets. There'll be quite substantial housing in Bradfield. So I think when I talk to them, they are absolutely staying the course because, and I always say this, when I give talks about the Aerotropolis and about Bradfield to Japanese companies, there's not 20 people on the call, there's 700. So they see this area as the best global opportunity because of the airport and because of that access to the 3.6 billion people in the Asian middle class as the place to be. We had to do the groundwork first. We had to get that enabling infrastructure. We had to get metro happening. We had to get the airport with real momentum, and Simon's talked about that. I think we're now on the cusp of saying, okay, now we've got to convert that deal into this deal. And I think once we start releasing the land, I think you'll see people really get very excited.
I think we should all remember that Western Sydney finally has a strategic global importance to Australian government. Probably the three most important international relationships for Australian government now are with the Japanese and the Americans in a security pact who are largely embedded at Aerotropolis, and with the Indian community, which we'll come to with Gail. So Western Sydney, and for want of a better word, let's also say the Pacific. We have the Pacifica community, which has another strategic issue. So it's time for Western Sydney to put its foot forward globally. Belinda, before I go to discuss the Central River City, might you give us and thank you for your work with our team on the report today. And there's just the pamphlet. There's more to it, so you can go through it. Could you just maybe explain that life cycle concept that I've touched on, of the need for that renewal of the Quangos, so to take an agency out of council control, and when and how does it go back?
Yep, absolutely. So I think where we started working with Luke and the team was looking at place-based entities, and not just what they needed to do, but the when. So particularly the Western Sydney Airport that Simon talked about, and the Western Parkland Authority with the Aerotropolis build is on a time frame for delivery, and that's real, and it needs more consideration of what more is needed to help coordinate and leverage that time frame of delivery outside of what is other operation of government. So things like investment attraction that Jennifer just spoke about, it's more than matchmaking at this stage. It is incentivising, it is negotiating, and so that does change the government operation activities that will be happening, and things like infrastructure coordination are required to meet those place-based visions. So that's really, that front end of that clock, of the logic framework of what's needed to deliver for a place. And then as that vision is delivered, there becomes other places that are better to then deliver those activities, like local government and other usual operations of government. So that's really giving it that logic framework so that you can assess the needs of the place, and in particular deliver to the time frame. And so while there are obvious constraints of government now, there is an ambitious delivery and opportunity for Western Sydney and the Aerotropolis, and so that's what that logic framework gives an opportunity to realise how that gets delivered.
And of course this has happened before. The Sydney Cove Redevelopment Authority, Sydney Foreshore Authority has gone through its process with Pyrmont and the Rocks and largely been returned to a civic function, or other state agencies taking a role. I think in Newcastle, Honeysuckle flayed around for a while, then finally found its groove and has delivered a vibrancy back to the old steel city after BHP debunked. So this is not a new thing, this life cycle. To you, Liz, to that, as I've obnoxiously suggested, take your agency away. It's the dialogue way. Welcome. Look, I know privately, this is not a strange concept to you. You're living it currently, going through inheriting an agency that has seemingly been there now for almost 25 years. It's setting up for a quarter century. Are you confident that the broader role can be replaced by, do you work closely with those other state agencies or local government now? Were this to be a government policy, how disorderly would it be?
Thanks, Chris. And of course, being a current New South Wales government employee, I'll talk about this in the hypothetical.
Absolute hypothetical.
Respect their position. Look, there is a reason why I'm an interim CEO on a fixed-term contract, and it was really an appreciation of what is the opportunity at Sydney Olympic Park and how does it need to be delivered now. The most important thing that can happen out here is the release of the master plan to appreciate the metro development and get the development on the ground. We have seen an extraordinary number of developers knocking on our door saying, what's the process to converting our long-term leasehold sites to freehold residential. So there's an incredible opportunity. The population will increase 5-fold over the next, 20, 30 years here. Absolutely right. When you want a huge infrastructure project, a massive community to be built, yep, you put in one government agency and you give them a truckload of powers to get it done, and that was what happened with the Olympic Coordination Authority. You then need to know when to get out. Maybe that time has come for Sydney Olympic Park. We absolutely have agencies who are incredibly sophisticated in what they do. And personal view, I'm not sure a small agency, being a landlord, a local government manager, a water supply authority, a venue manager, a leaseholder, is a modern way of governance of a precinct. So absolutely, you've got fantastic state government agencies who would do it outside the boundaries. Why not investigate them doing it within the boundaries? Why not have Parramatta Council operate this like a jewel in the crown, which it can be for Parramatta? They don't own any of the land, and that's why I sweep the streets and mow the grass and do those sorts of things. But very soon they will have a community here that is 5 times of what it is. And so why not give that community a council who is looking after them? I've talked to Gail about this. When we start collecting the infrastructure contributions that will come with the development, I've said to Gail, who's going to run the library? Because I'm not sure it's the state government's job, even though we've collected the contributions. So I think the time is now, when you're on the precipice of major development coming, who is best placed to run this? For our stakeholders that love events, it does not stop this being an events precinct. You have the amazing venues of New South Wales, the biggest venues in New South Wales. Yep. That will not change. You have the Easter show every year. That will not change. And having a small authority, you don't need that to run massive events. Look at the success of Sydney CBD with a council who's very sophisticated. We can do it here.
Gail, you ready to have a second CBD in the second CBD? Are you ready to have Olympic Park greatness thrust upon the city of Parramatta?
Well, Chris, we're not a second CBD, so I have to correct
good
you
point.
on that, mate. We are Western Sydney's global city. So we'll just do a fact check.
That was going to be my
right
next
there.
question, but you jumped straight there. So,
But Liz is right. We have had this discussion. I look at it this way, and it's, there's been a lot of work by Belinda and her crew, but essentially, for me, I've worked in state government and local government. It's all about the tipping point. You need delivery authorities at a certain point in time. And then when they are no longer required to deliver much of anything anymore, that's when you need a service authority. And councils are essentially a service authority. Or another way to put it, stop talking about Sydney Olympic Park as a precinct and start talking about it as a community. Because really we're at that tipping point where it was a precinct that did a lot of good things for a long time, has great venues, has great parklands, all the rest of it, but it's now becoming a community full of residents, and as Liz says, is going to, more than double in size over the next few years. And delivery authorities don't do communities. No offence to any of those that have tried to do it before, but that's what local councils do. And whether you love councils or hate them, that's their main gig. You look after communities, you run the libraries. Mostly you run the swimming pools, Occasionally you run stadiums as well, but you don't want to because they lose money. And I've said to Liz, I don't want any of their venues. Thank you very much. But we do all of the good stuff that support communities. So I look at it really, really simply. There's a tipping point where you no longer need a delivery authority because they've done all the hard yards. They've done all the planning, infrastructure, delivery. I think this is SOPA's 6th master plan, 5th or 6th. It's been done 5 or 6 times before. We're at the point now where the council can do it perfectly well. And Parramatta Council is a very large council with lots of expertise. We're at the point now where we could easily pick up that master plan and implement it. And we could easily look after all of the residential areas and the commercial areas and do the stuff that normal councils do, which is town centres and suburbs, because that's what the residential precinct is going to become. It's going to become a community and it's going to become a suburb. And yes, there's all that important infrastructure on the side, stadiums and sporting facilities. The Office of Sport can have the sporting facilities, the parklands can have the parklands, and I'll take the rest. Thank you very much, Liz.
Just remember, you won an award last night for your new pool too, so you've got a few facilities.
We have a pool that makes money, as distinct from, well, we won't say it, but as distinct from most pools that don't.
Jennifer, speaking of life cycles of Quangos, and while we're saying you're at the front end and we want to ramp it up to get that development, you've also had a mini life cycle, and I think if I was to properly represent the views of some of our local government residents, there's been a concern in the early days that WAPCA saw itself probably, or the government saw it being more of a glorified Lord Mayor of the Western Parkland. I assume you also see now that not only government ramps you up to get on with the job, but you pull back to more the delivery of the 3 airport precincts rather than being, you know, the Hawkesbury to Campbelltown, the sort of the nanny sort of local government.
Yeah, look, I think I was very supportive of the government saying we want you to get out of that overarching coordination role across the Parkland city. I think we'd done the blueprint. There are different views about that. The crucial piece of work that we needed to do, and we're still doing with local government, is the economic strategy work. Because one concern that local government, I think, legitimately has is we don't want you to suck economic activity into the aerotropolis. We need you to push it out from the aerotropolis, and I'm very committed to doing that. So I think we're now at that tipping point where we've looked at the kind of forces across the Parkland city. We've got a strategy now we're working through with local government about what does that master economic plan look like, not a master plan, but a master economic strategy. And now we need to get on delivering the 3 precincts. But I don't want it to be not clear that we have not been delivering the 3 precincts. I mean, when I look at the amount of investment that is now being unleashed in the agribusiness precinct, we're talking billions and billions of dollars here, and we're talking thousands and tens of thousands of jobs. When I look at the circular economy Northern Gateway Logistics Park, or Logistics Hub, there's just a tremendous amount of investment in DAs on the ground now, and that's a coordinating role because that's all private sector land. And then if you were to go to Bradfield, I think people would be staggered at how much development's actually underway. The metro station's being built, the AMRF is being built. You know, part of the job, part of the challenge, I think, in these roles is what does government do, what does government seed, and what does government get out of? And I think that's a really good tension to have. I think we're in the doing and seeding role. So there are things that we're doing in the authority, like the Advanced Manufacturing Research Facility, that are done in other places around the world, where I think that's a sort of seeding role. We had to get that started because the biggest challenge for Western Sydney, and I see this in Singapore and other parts of the world that I visit, is that you lose the manufacturing base. You lose the base because you haven't done the work that the AMRF will do, which is getting people up to using new production materials, being digital and so on. The biggest risk would be the tens of thousands of small manufacturers disappear because they have not kept pace with technology. That's a seeding role. The work we've been doing on education, creating micro-credentials around additive printing, the very high-tech things that companies want, that's a seeding role. The delivery role, the to-do role, is to create the city. The coordinating role belongs to someone, and I think it belongs to us to drive that economic activity, to drive that economic vision, to get that coherence, to make sure that we're picking the industries where we've got the best advantage space, aerospace, defence, semiconducting, that allow Western Sydney to tap into those big global supply chains. That's a government role. Government should keep doing that. And then once we've done the delivery, then I think the question becomes who runs the city. And I think that's the way to think about it. Do, seed, deliver, keep doing. And I think Gail's right, you get to tipping points where you've got to ramp up, and then you've got to get to a point where you say that's not going to be the role of government in perpetuity. And I think that's the mature discussion we need to have.
I might go to Gail or Belinda as independent observers and not to compromise you about talking about potential structure going forward. Gail, it'd be fair to say that one of the great advantages of Quangos is they discreetly allow councils to whinge publicly, kick and scream, while privately going, get on with it, do the stuff we couldn't possibly do. Would that possibly be a history and possibly one of the advantages of the state agency, the cover it does provide politically to local government?
Yeah, yes, it does. I think there was more of that in the past, though, than there is now. And I think it's horses for courses. There's a lot of councils that now, we put on our big boy pants and we don't hide behind, you know, those secret deals. They used to say, we're going to attack you publicly for doing this, but behind the scenes, we really like what you're doing. Can you please keep doing it? We're big enough and ugly enough not to have to do that anymore. And my role at Parramatta is to continue to position the city and the council as the leading government in Western Sydney. So we don't need to do as much of that. Yes, at one point in time it was very convenient for councils to be able to, you know, bash the relevant state agency and then secretly be delighted that they were doing all of the hard yards. But I think, you know, in the last 10 or so years, a lot of councils have moved on from that. It's still the case in, you know, more regional and rural areas where they don't have the resources to do the work, and they're glad for the government to come in and step in. But you know, speaking for Parramatta, you know, we don't need that. We don't need to have that position anymore. We can take care of ourselves, and we want to take care of ourselves.
Belinda, I'm trying to bundle some of the questions on Slido into this. Would it make sense, because people are talking about the role that councils are better, and Gail mentioned before, representing a community, and sometimes we want Quangos sometimes to ignore communities, or call it ignore NIMBYs, get on with the job. Is a compromise that maybe in a future management structure or board structure for a WAPCA, that maybe a mayor, or with respect to CEO of a Penrith or a Liverpool, would sit on the board? Is that a doom to disaster, or could that possibly lead to a greater integration of community and delivery?
Yeah, and I think we're already on the path, as both Gail and Jennifer said, is that maturity of coordination, looking at their economic needs across those councils while still looking to leverage what goes into the aerotropolis, and again, yeah, working both internally and externally with the agency. So I think it's really being clear on the mandate and the resources that the agency, the place-based agency has, but ensuring that coordination, and I think we're well on the path of that maturity there.
Jennifer, I know wheels are in motion, cabinet submissions everywhere, you know, everything's happening, everything everywhere all at once at the moment. Are you sitting here today confident the challenge I just laid out about the need to get cracking on the aerotropolis, get cracking on delivery of the airport? Are you more confident today than you were 6 months ago that you'll have the structure, the funding, the authority to get the job done, or are you going to be stuck in your own circular economy of bureaucracy?
No, I'm more confident. I don't think we need a new authority. I think because we have a lot of the powers that you talked about. We don't have compulsory land acquisition, but government has the tools to do that. You know, we can do joint ventures, we can master plan, we can hold funds, we can retain funds. I think what government needed to do, and I respect them for that, they needed to sort out who was doing what. And I think it's fair to say there were too many people planning, and give that authority back to Kirsten's department and let her get on with that. What I want to get on is deliver the 3 precincts, coordinate the agribusiness precinct and the Northern Gateway, and deliver Bradfield. And I think government, and it was really very good to hear the 2 ministers today. I think government knows that we have to do that, and I think they know we have to deliver a city, not a business park. And I think they know that we have to get the tools to do that. The question is, we need the Commonwealth at the table here too, and you've talked about that in your speech, and I think it's hugely important. That decision yesterday was bewildering around the M7 and the M12. This is crucial to get the traffic into the airport, to make the airport viable.
They're the owner that's going to want to sell that airport at some stage, so it's also crazy.
And we need the National Reconstruction Fund to get a focus on precincts, because some of the investment we talked about today will need co-investment from government, and it will be substantial. If we want to get a space economy, which I'm really keen to do in Western Sydney, because, you know, every space expert I talk to in the world says, I can't believe Australia hasn't got a big space precinct in somewhere like Western Sydney. I want to get a semiconductor industry, because everyone I talk to says, I can't believe Australia doesn't really kind of take semiconducting seriously. It's all done in China and Taiwan. What could possibly go wrong? So, you know, I think, you know, we've got to get focus and energy, and the Commonwealth has got a $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund. That would go a long way to seeding some of these big industries in. And the last thing we need to be saying to industry is, look, go on a panel. I mean, people just look at me when I say that to them.
Not this panel, it's a great panel.
No, this is a great panel. But, you know, you'll have to go on a panel, and they just say, no, it's not going to happen. We can go to India, we can go other places. So, but I'm very pleased with what the Minister said today. We've had very good discussions with government. I think people know we have to build a city. They know we have to get the jobs, but we also need the Commonwealth at the table.
A couple of quick questions to finish from the Central River City. Liz, what can you say to Jennifer she needs to avoid in the process? What did SOPA learn along the way that when life cycle comes around for WAPCA, different stages of it, other than maybe get out earlier, but what are the pitfalls Jennifer and her team need to avoid?
I think one of those is really spreading your functions too thin, trying to be all things to all people. And an observer might suggest that's happened here at Sydney Olympic Park. You really need to think about who is best to deliver it, regardless of the geography of the place that it's being delivered in. So in New South Wales, for example, who might be best to own a stadium and arena? Who might be best to own a train station? Sydney Olympic Park Authority owns the train station here. Who might be best to, provide community facilities? Don't try and be everything to all people. That's good when you've got a boots on the ground deliver. Over time, you've got to get to what does modern government look like? Does it make sense for a modern government, either state, federal or local, to be involved in this particular precinct?
Gail, lastly for you, you're trying to effectively and not competing with others, but to lead a leading government in Western Sydney, the capital city of Western Sydney as well. How are you able to go and do what you do without the powers of a Quango? Are you confident, you said the new, mature, better resource councils, can the Parramatta CBD and its potentially sibling along the way here get to where it wants to meet its global ambitions without the sort of authority and muscle and resourcing that comes from a state government agency?
That's a hard one. Yes and no. There are certain things that we don't need state government assistance with, but there are other
You've done pretty well for the past 10 years getting some state government money, so yeah, as every other council says.
Look, the question was put to me when I first started, why don't we have our own Act? The City of Sydney had its own Act. Why don't we have the City of Parramatta Act? And I've worked at the City of Sydney, as you well know, and and I've worked in Queensland and where they have introduced legislation for particular precincts or councils or, to deliver certain things. So potentially the City of Parramatta Act could be something that recognises the significance of Parramatta. Within around 10 years, there'll be more people living west of Parramatta than there will be living east of Parramatta. So maybe that's food for thought for government. Maybe it should have its own act. Maybe, everything in Western Sydney in terms of, gross regional product and population and housing and all the rest of it does deserve a special focus through legislation. At the moment, we're relying on, the kindness of strangers and goodwill of state agencies to get what we need, but it may not be enough in the future. But we'll see how we go. But Parramatta is about to write its 2050 vision, so these are ideas that will be explored as part of that.
Thank you. In closing, I've just got one Slido question. So what does this mean for Westrock? I've got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to end things that have gone past their life cycle, it's probably Westrock. Can you all join me in thanking the panel you do want to be on? Jennifer, Liz, Gail and Belinda.